Absolutely spectacular once again. ADR Services Inc. is a leading provider in alternative dispute resolution services. We provide mediation, arbitration, judicial and discovery references, and appellate consultation, along with a whole host of other alternative dispute resolution services. With 7 offices statewide and a robust remote Zoom program, we pride ourselves in offering unparalleled resolution services through our exclusive panel, which is comprised of more than 150 of the most distinguished and talented neutrals across the state. ADR Services Inc. was recognized as the top alternative dispute resolution provider by the Reporter in both 2021 and 2022. We make a concerted effort to maintain the highest caliber quality of our panel through thoughtful and selective recruitment. Our neutrals' diverse backgrounds and experiences on the bench and in the legal field allow us to steer their toes towards the right case, while their varied personalities permit our clients to find a match that will lead to a successful resolution. Some of our newest neutrals join us from right here in Contra Costa, namely Judge Steve Austin and Judge Anita Santos. Also here in attendance today, we have our keynote speaker, Justice Ming. We have Justice Maria Rivera here, Mark Lahaki, Judge Flyer is around here somewhere, as I believe it's Claudia Long. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you once again to the Contra Costa County Bar Association for putting on such a valuable and engaging program, and we're very proud to be included and to support this. Now to move along, I would be thrilled to introduce our keynote speaker today, who I mentioned is Justice Ming Chin. Justice Chin joined ADR Services Inc. in 2021 after a highly decorated and illustrious career marked by exemplary public service, including 24 years as an Associate Justice of the California Supreme Court. He's deeply respected and admired among his peers, not only for his remarkable intellect and strength of character, but also for his dedication and contributions to the California judiciary and to the legal community at large. As a mediator, arbitrator, referee, and appellate consultant, Justice Chin continues to service the business and legal communities by resolving complex and divisive matters through alternative dispute resolution. He's the Vice Chair of the California Judicial Council and has chaired the Council's Commission for Impartial Courts, Court Technology Advisory Committee, and Science and Law Steering Committee. He has frequently lectured on the intersection of genetics and the law and about developments in California employment law. In his keynote presentation today, Justice Chin will be speaking on the subject of science, technology, and the law. And before I close, we did want to say thank you to Justice Marciano for the thoughtful gift of the stories from the Brain Courts building. It's very well gift. And without further ado, Justice Chin.
Thank you, Katie. It's wonderful to be here. Isn't it a little early? And isn't it a little early to be talking about science? I said to Mark, how in the world am I going to wake this crowd up? How am I going to wake myself up? Somebody in the restroom said, are you a morning person? I said, I will try to be this morning. Actually, Mark asked me how I got interested in this subject matter. And I told him that I wrote the first 2 opinions, one of the first 2 opinions in California on the admissibility of DNA evidence. The case was the People versus Barney when I was on the Court of Appeal in Maria's bailiwick. It was, I think, 1992, a case called People versus Barney. And as I told Mark, after I wrote the opinion, people seemed to think that I knew what I was talking about. And then they started asking me to teach it. And as I told Mark, I said, now I really have to learn what I'm talking about. So I taught the first DNA class to, see, there's some chords here that I'm going to trip on. CJUR is the education arm of the judiciary. Actually, California has one of the best continuing education programs for judges in the country. And I can tell you that from firsthand experience because I've taught in California and I've taught in many other states throughout the country to judges. This education system was developed by Bernie Whitman, and I'm sure you all know him by his summary of California law. It was a remarkable contribution to the judges of California, and to this day, it is the best continuing education arm in the country. After I wrote People vs. Barney, I started getting invitations to teach, first by teacher, then to other California groups. Then the chief of Wisconsin asked me to come and talk to her judges. The chief of Ohio asked me to come and talk to his judges. Then I started getting invitations from foreign countries. I went to Italy, to Canada, to Mexico, to China, to Taiwan, but the capper was Thailand. I once met Princess Chulalongkorn. She is a princess of Thailand. She came to the United States, got a PhD in genetics, went back to Thailand and opened a genetics institute. She's a princess, she doesn't have to do anything. She asked me to come to Thailand to teach DNA to two judges. I did that and went to Bangkok for a week. It was a remarkable experience. I said, will there be translators? They said, absolutely not. Everyone speaks perfect English. They were right. I spoke on DNA, not an easy subject matter to be talking about to a group of Thai judges. But I knew from the questions that they asked that, of course, they knew exactly what I was talking about. Now, you've all heard about the use of DNA as an identification tool. You may have read about it. You may have seen it on television. You've heard that it is used in cases to identify a suspect. Most of us today have some familiarity with science and understanding of just how crucial its discovery has been to many aspects of criminal investigations, as well as civil liability issues. Science and technology has forever changed how we identify suspects with greater accuracy, how we determine who might be liable for a particular accident. The vast changes in the application of DNA technology has made it possible for us to understand the very essence of what life is all about and what we're made of. But how did science develop? And what has happened to make it such an important part of our daily lives? We're going to try to explore some of that this morning. Before the acceptance of DNA evidence as a forensic tool, a defendant's fate was typically in the hands of juries that were given the task of deciding eyewitness testimony, confessions, sometimes questionable forensic evidence like bite marks or tire marks or shoe marks or footprints. The trial courts often read imprecise instructions to juries on what weight they should give to particular evidence. Katie, if you could go to slide 2. Get this out of my way so Such evidence, although generally reliable, led to some unfortunate jury findings, including guilty convictions of innocent defendants, or in the case of silent movie star Charlie Chaplin in 1946, an incorrect conclusion that he was the father of a child born out of wedlock. In a highly contested and newsworthy case from the Court of Appeal in Los Angeles, it was decided that Chaplin was most definitely the father of the child. The Court of Appeals simply refused to overturn jury findings that Chaplin was the father, even though there was unambiguous proof that he could not have been. Just as an aside, the trial judge in that case was none other than Stanley Mosk. Stanley was still on the California Supreme Court when I arrived in 1996. The author of this opinion was Malcolm McComb, who was later on the California Supreme Court. Now, at the time, the appellate court did not find that Chaplin was most definitely the father. It simply refused to overturn the jury finding that he was the father because under California law, at that time, 1946, blood tests were not conclusive. Rather, it was the jury's job, as a finder of fact, and not the court's, to resolve conflicts between scientific testimony and the evidence in the case. It turns out Chaplin was not the father. The case highlights the fact that a jury must decide, relying on eyewitness testimony, to subjectively assess witness credibility. It is impossible to do with any certainty. Slide 3, Katie. But how and when did the introduction of DNA evidence change the landscape? Although the 21st century advancements have been outstanding, rapid, we must remember that potential application of DNA technology as a forensic tool became possible as early as 1953. That's when James Watson, Francis Crick, along with Rosalind Franklin, developed and first discovered and understood DNA's molecular structure. They published their findings. James Watson and Francis Crick eventually won the Nobel Prize for their work in discovering DNA. Unfortunately, Rosalind Franklin passed away before that award was made. Otherwise, she certainly would have been included. Slide 4, Katie. 13 years later, scientists determined, I'm going to turn this so that I can see what you're seeing. Okay, 13 years later, scientists determined how a DNA molecule codes the information. In the mid-1980s, building on DNA information regarding the fact that in humans, a number of repeat sections of DNA could differ from one person to another. Narrowing the findings further, it was discovered that examining variations in length of these DNA sequences, thus creating the ability to perform human identity tests. Slide 5, Katie. With the introduction of the Human Genome Project in 1990, now by that time I had started to get interested in DNA. So scientists throughout the world began mapping the human genome. And you may recall in your musings about DNA, of course you're all musing about DNA, we all have 2.5 billion base pairs. There are 4 letters in the genetic alphabet. So the scientists throughout the world in the Human Genome Project in 1990 started to map the human genome. Each country took a section. I actually met the scientist in China who was doing the Chinese section of the human genome. And this mapping was accomplished because of technology. Computer technology made it possible to map the human genome. These scientific advancements involve the use of DNA as a forensic tool. It revolutionized fields of medicine, biotechnology, animal husbandry, agriculture, and the law. So we cannot escape the benefits or the detriments of the use of this technology. Slide 6, Katie. PCAST, eventually DNA evidence as a method of identification, created a sea change in our fundamental legal principles. In 2016, PCAST, the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, reported there are no empirical studies to support the scientific viability and reliability of bite marks, footwear analysis, microscopic hair comparison, firearms analysis. These all often fail. Why? Because they are not reproducible. Now, the Department of Justice, U.S. Department of Justice, has not yet been willing to adopt PCAST recommendations regarding the admissibility of this evidence. But the use of DNA evidence as a reliable forensic science allowed legal scholars to support its use as a reliable alternative to all of the other things that I mentioned. Now, as soon as the new age of empirical evidence was ushered into the courtroom, things changed rapidly. For example, in 1998, California codified and expanded the application of DNA evidence in criminal proceedings. California further expanded DNA database collections, including sampling of individuals arrested for felony offenses. In short, the discovery of DNA as a forensic identity tool was an evidentiary game changer and became even more sophisticated as we discovered additional information about its structure and relationship to our identities. Number 7, Katie. Today, police, prosecutors, defense counsel typically rely on DNA evidence to find and assist in their investigations. Throughout the country, huge DNA databanks are being compiled with genetic information of convicted offenders, arrestees, suspects, their family members, and even witnesses. And they are reliably tested against samples from crime scenes. Number 8, Katie. As of October of this year, the FBI national database includes 14 million samples. It has produced well over 587,000 DNA matches. The use of DNA as an effective tool has been remarkable. Number 9, Katie. There are many positive aspects to the use of DNA evidence in criminal prosecutions. According to the Innocence Project, since 1989, there have been many DNA exonerations. For example, Ronnie Long, convicted of rape in 1976 in North Carolina, following a trial marred by official misconduct, perjury, mistaken witness testimony, and false evidence, Mr. Long served almost 44 years before being exonerated in 2020. Another example, Clifford Williams Jr. and his nephew, Herbert Myers, spent 42 years in a Florida prison. Williams served many of those years on death row for a murder they did not commit before being exonerated in 2019. Their trial was marred by an inadequate legal defense and prosecutorial misconduct. But let's talk about DNA profile, Katie, number 10. Sometimes in criminal indictment, suspects are described by their DNA profile rather than by name. Why? because authorities may not have recovered genetic material associated with the crime, filed charges using the suspect's DNA profile rather than their name before the statute of limitations have run. Of course, DNA identity evidence assists not just the accuser, but also the accused, as well as the convicted. In other words, as the U.S. Supreme Court has stated, DNA has the unparalleled ability to identify the guilty as well as exonerate the innocent. The number one cause of these wrongful convictions has been eyewitness misidentification, followed by misapplication of forensic evidence, and finally, false confessions. So far, there have been over 360 post-conviction DNA exonerations in the U.S., including 20 people who served time on death row. All 50 states currently give inmates some form of post-conviction access to DNA testing. Finally, number 11, Katie. There are many uses of DNA technology today, but it is especially critical to addressing the backlog of DNA samples in rape test kits. There is no current federal law that mandates tracking or testing of kits, so it is up to each state to assess their own backlogs and decide how to move forward. Many jurisdictions have not yet set systems in place to do that, making it virtually impossible to know exactly what the backlog is. However, based on the jurisdictions that have reported, progress is being made through a series of federal and private grants to clear the backlog. In your own backyard, as of 2019, the Contra Costa District Attorney has cleared the county's backlog of 1,246 untested rape kits that accumulated from 1978 to 2016, with the assistance of a grant from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office in New York. This year, Orange County cleared a 30-year backlog of untested rape kits leading to charges in 6 cold hit cases. I don't know if any of you know this, but my son, Jason, is a judge in Alameda County. He came from the Alameda County Attorney's Office, where I also served. Jason, during his time in that office, was in charge of, guess what? The DNA unit. Jason also cleared, I should say, Judge Chip also cleared the DNA backlog in Alameda County. I have to tell you an aside story. There was a vice president for the University of California named Dr. Bruce Darling. Bruce and I and Jason became good friends while Jason was a student at the University of San Diego. And I'm not going to tell you how they got to be good friends. Anyway, when the president of UC San Diego was appointed to be the president of the UC system, Dr. Darling came up with him to Oakland. Bruce was put in charge of the 3 national labs, Livermore, Berkeley, Los Alamos. When he got wind that Jason was appointed to head the DNA unit in Alameda County, the Alameda County DA's office, he called me and said, Ming, do you think you and Jason would like a tour of the DNA lab at Lawrence Livermore? I said, I've been there, done that, but I'd be happy to do it again if Jason wants to go. I actually taught courses at Lawrence Livermore. But Bruce took us on a tour of the DNA lab at Lawrence Livermore. What a remarkable the experience that was. The best part of it was the head of the lab said, Jason, if you ever need a testing of a sample that you cannot get tested elsewhere, call us. He did. I will tell you more about that tour when we get to the rapid testing. But additional funding has been awarded to help state and local governments process untested sexual assault cases. Let's go to cold hits, Katie, number 12. As DNA databases expand, suspects increasingly are identified through cold hits, meaning that a match turns up when investigators compare the genetic profile of DNA found at the scene of a crime with DNA profiles in a database. Disputes have arisen in these cases as to the significance of the match, because even unrelated persons share on average 2 or 3 genetic markers. Now, you all know that you get half of your DNA from mom and half of your DNA from dad. So, relatives have similar DNA, but not exact, unless you're an identical twin. So, because even unrelated people share on average 2 or 3 markers, there is a possibility that a match occurs by chance. Smaller likelihood of a random match, the likelihood that the defendant was the source of the DNA found at the scene. Let's go to 17, Katie. One question you might have is whether or not there are still possibilities for a defendant to challenge a DNA identification. There continue to be many admissibility issues relating to forensic use of DNA, and the defendant's right to confront witnesses who testify against them is an important one. Such a right is embedded in the 6th Amendment, the Confrontation Clause. One example of a challenge to DNA admissibility on the 6th Amendment grounds was reached in the United States Supreme Court case 2012, Williams versus Illinois. During a rape trial, a prosecution expert answered yes when asked, was a computer match generated of the male DNA profile found in semen from a vaginal swab of the victim to a male DNA profile that had been identified as having originated from the defendant. The defendant claimed this testimony violated the Confrontation Clause to the extent it indicated that one of the test samples came from the vaginal swabs of the victim, because the expert had no personal knowledge of that fact. Number 18. In a plurality decision, the divided court rejected the defendant's claim, but was unable to produce a majority view for its conclusion. 4 justices, Chief Justices Kennedy, Breyer, and Alito, agreed that the claim failed for 2 reasons. First, the Confrontation Clause does not apply to out-of-state statements not offered at trial to prove the truth of the matter asserted, and the phrase in question was not admissible to prove the truth of the matter asserted, that the matching DNA profile was found in semen from the vaginal swabs of the victim. Rather, the fact was a mere premise of the prosecutor's question, and the expert simply assumed that premise to be true when she gave her answer. Second, according to the 4 justices, the DNA lab report, even if admitted into evidence, was quite different from the extrajudicial statements, such as affidavits, depositions, prior testimony, confessions. The Confrontation Clause was originally understood to reach those kinds of extrajudicial statements. From a policy perspective, the 4 justices who endorsed this analysis also expressed concern that if the DNA profile could not be introduced without calling the technicians who participated in the preparation of the profile, the economic pressures would encourage prosecutors to forego DNA testing and rely instead on older forms of evidence such as identification, eyewitness identification, and they're less reliable. Justice Thomas provided the fifth vote to reject the defendant's confrontation clause claim, but on a completely different ground. Now you begin to understand why the U.S. Supreme Court opinions are opaque. Writing only for itself, he concluded that even though the phrase in question, see, I can criticize the my former superiors now that I'm no longer sitting on the bench. I would never do that. Justice Thomas said the confrontation clause was inapplicable solely because the last statements lacked requisite formality and solemnity to be considered testimonial for purposes of the confrontation clause. Now, isn't that perfectly clear? Slide 19. The four dissenting justices also rejected the majority analysis, concluding that the phrase was offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted, and that admission of the testimony violated the confrontation clause. The unusual makeup of the dissenters should tell you all you need to know about how controversial this issue remains. Justice Scalia, joining three members of the then liberal wing, Justice Ginsburg, Sotomayor, and Kagan. The dissenting opinions that they predicted that the court's fractured views would produce significant confusion about the confrontation clause application in this area. What has happened? That prediction, wrote Justice Gorsuch in 2018. Now, you remember that the U.S. Supreme Court has the habit of writing opinions based upon their cert conferences. We never did that until recently. Now, the California Supreme Court is writing dissents based upon matters on the Wednesday grant calendar. I thought it was a terrible idea, but I'm no longer there, so what do I do? Justice Gorsuch in 2018, on a denial of cert in a case called Stewart versus Alabama, he said the court's 2012 decision that requires lower courts to distill holdings on two separate important issues from four competing opinions has sown confusion in the courts across the country. He also said, in urging his colleagues to accept cert on Stewart, the court owed the lower courts struggling to abide by our holdings more clarity. What a novel idea. Recent, number 21, advancements in DNA technology, however, are making it harder to challenge the accuracy of DNA evidence. The introduction of rapid DNA analysis has shortened the time it takes to perform DNA testing from weeks to about 90 minutes. Now, back to our visit to Lawrence Livermore Lab. At the end of the lab, the scientists took us into their last development room for new technology. Guess what it was? They showed me a black box. They said, we can put the DNA sample in one side and the result comes out to the other. It's almost instantaneous. And they asked me, would that help? I guess. I'm not a scientist. Can you verify it? Can you prove that it works? I had a few questions. They answered all of them, and they said this was on the horizon. It's coming. It consists of automated DNA extraction, amplification, separation, detection, and analysis. The only human intervention is collecting the DNA sample, typically from the mouse swab, and inserting it into the device. Number 22. Following the 2017 passage of the Rapid DNA Act of 2017, the FBI has established national standards and procedures for rapid DNA testing. Several manufacturers have developed machines that can be placed right in the police station to automatically process the DNA samples. It is a remarkable advancement. The idea is to do what's currently being done by outside laboratories in weeks after an arrest. It can be done in the police station while the arrestee is being processed. As the FBI establishes enhanced rapid DNA analysis, the ability to perform real-time DNA testing during the booking process will enable law enforcement to do remarkable things. This will also enhance public safety by solving unsolved crimes, helping to preserve and allocate those precious investigative resources. It may also relieve some backlog facing overburden, those backlogs that I told you about, the rape kits. Pilot programs are also underway to test these mini DNA labs with state DNA databases. They're reporting some positive results. Rapid DNA technology has been used for the first time in a criminal investigation to apprehend burglars who stole more than 30,000 worth of items from the home of a U.S. military member who was serving in Afghanistan. In Arizona, rapid DNA technology has been used to solve crimes involving a burglary and an officer-involved shooting in which the suspect left behind samples at the scene. In the courtroom, test results using rapid DNA technology are already being admitted in criminal prosecutions and of course will be useful in identifying suspects within a very short period of time. Of course, even with all the advancements, rapid DNA testing will not magically appear overnight. They are continuing to ask and answer all of those questions that I asked the scientists at the Lawrence Livermore lab. But eventually, I can foresee that it will happen. This technology is incredible. It will help us solve the crime problem that is running rampant across the country. Slide number 23, Katie. Other technical, how much time do we have? Are we?
5 to 7 minutes.
Oh, well, let's go to
Take
Kristen.
your time. We've got time built in, so how much more time do you need?
Oh, no, I don't want to take more time away from my call. Mark is waiting to speak. We don't want to cut into his time. But I want to get to CRISPR. Katie, if you can get to the CRISPR because if I don't talk about CRISPR, I will I know it's here somewhere.
The Jennifer Doudna one?
Yes. Well, yes, let's go to that. Anyway, I was asked by my publisher, the writer group, to do a science program. They asked me what subject matter I would pick. And I said, in this environment, it has to be CRISPR. And they asked me who would I get to do it. And I said, why not go to the top? I contacted Dr. Jennifer Doudna from the University of California. Dr. Doudna said, of course, we will do it. I will give you the head of my CRISPR lab. His name is Dr. Theodore Hernoff. And as I told Mark, when I told him about doing the program on CRISPR, I said to myself, oh no, a Russian scientist who can barely speak English talking about a subject matter that nobody will understand anyway. This is a recipe for disaster. I met Dr. Ernoff. He spoke perfect English. And the best part of it was he was able to translate scientific jargon into language that normal human beings can understand. I will try to translate part of that for you today. Dr. Jennifer Doudna, by the way, as we were putting this program together, Dr. Doudna won the Nobel Prize for her work on CRISPR. By the way, she's the first woman from the University of California to receive the Nobel Prize. Can you believe that? It took all of this time. And just an aside, Dr. Doudna was raised in Hilo on the Big Island. When she went to her high school science teacher, requesting that she be able to study to take a class on science, guess what his response was? Science is not for girls. I wonder what that science teacher is saying today. Anyway, Jennifer won the Nobel Prize. A friend of hers called the day it was announced, and she said, "What do you think of the Nobel Prize?" She said, "Who won it?" She had no idea.
Oh my goodness.
She looked at her phone and it was lit up. But the best part about receiving the Nobel Prize, in addition to the $1 million stipend, she said, they gave me a lifetime parking pass. So, CRISPR is a natural process that occurs in the body. This book that I have the Nobel Prize up here, but the book that I have next is the book up there. Yeah, this is The Codebreaker by Walter Isaacson. I recommend it to you. I also recommend Dr. Doudna's book to you. It is called A Break in the Code or something like that. Anyway, this process of CRISPR is a natural process in the body. They actually were studying how bacteria in our bodies reject a virus that attacks. CRISPR makes a copy of the virus so that it recognizes it and can attack it when it reappears in the body. I don't know why it didn't work for the COVID, but Dr. Doudna has been able to refine CRISPR so that it can be programmed to attack a particular part of the DNA. Go in, extract it, insert the proper DNA. Dr. Ernoff gave us one example. A woman with sickle cell anemia. Sickle cell is caused by one mistake in the 2.2 billion letters in the genetic alphabet. A instead of G. CRISPR was used on a sickle cell patient. It was used to extract the defective one letter in the alphabet, inserted the proper letter. A year later, she is cured. Can you imagine the ramifications of what that will mean to medicine in the future? It is remarkable. It is exciting. It will bring medicine into the 21st century, and all of us will be better off for it. Are there downsides? Of course. Could you put on the designer baby? Jennifer Doudna once had a nightmare. She dreamt that Adolf Hitler came to her in a dream and said, "Dr. Doudna, could you explain to me how CRISPR works?" She woke up in a cold sweat. What if this technology gets into the wrong hands? And it is used for superior race, for designer babies, for lots of other nonsense that nobody should care about, rather than curing an individual who has sickle cell anemia. So Dr. Doudna has been working vigorously and carefully for years to make sure that this CRISPR technology is used for good rather than ill. The one time she was at a conference and one of the scientists said, they were all saying, "What if it gets in the wrong hands?" And one scientist said, "One day we will be asking ourselves, is it ethical for us not to use this technology for good?" We should all ask ourselves that question, but keep in mind all of the negatives that can occur if it is not used for good. You all may remember the ruckus that was created when a couple of Chinese scientists used CRISPR to develop in human embryos an inheritable change in the human genome. Now, granted, it was a beneficial change because these babies were genetically changed so that they would be immune from HIV. A lot of them. But what happens when we change the inheritability of the human genome? There are lots of ramifications. I've probably raised more problems this morning for you than answered questions. But I hope at least I've incited some interest in what law, science, and technology is bringing to our doorstep. There are lots of good things happening. There are lots of things that we must be concerned about. But let us together be better informed and better understand what science will mean to all of us in the future. It's been a pleasure to visit with you this morning. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Oh, okay. I don't want to intrude on Mark's time.
If there are any questions,
Does anybody have any questions? How many of you majored in science? How about engineering? How about liberal arts? When I asked that question to other audience, somebody said, "Does political science count?" So when Mark asked me how I got interested in the subject matter, I did tell him about People versus Barney and all of my teaching throughout the world on science and DNA. What I did not tell him was that my wife is a pharmacist, and she is the scientist in the family, and she was my consultant on all of these lectures because I wanted to make sure that I got it right. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
Before I get into announcements, I'd like to actually give that shout out to that team. I've come from 30 years of nonprofit management background, and I honestly, and we hear this all the time, that this team at the Bar Association is phenomenal. And you know Jenny, you know Barbara, you know Emily, you know Anne, you know Carolyn, our new staff person, Sarah. If you all would stand up, I'd love to give you all the credit. collaborative nature, and it's good, it's just really positive culture. I think our team sees that, but it's also a reflection of all of you, the members, the speakers, the section leaders, everyone who makes our organization thrive. So thank you so much. I wanted to kind of get a little housekeeping out of the way. As always, in every session, we have the sign-in sheets in the back, so make sure you sign in for the MCLE. We also have evaluations that helps us determine how effective and productive and intentional the programs are, so please take the time to complete those so that we can plan for a better program. Not that it can ever be better than the current year, but more improved in the future. Again, as always, these events can't happen not only without your attendance, your support, but our sponsors as well. So I'd like to make sure we take time to thank them. Many of them have tables out in the foyer. If you've not visited them to say hello and learn about their services and products, please do. We have our event benefactor jams. We have our event presenter, ABR Services, our event patron Clio, our event partners, the Key, Industrious, DLCCS, our session sponsors, Hanson Bridget and Carnati, and please forgive me if I mispronounced that, Realty. Did I get that right? Okay, thank you. Our event supporters, Jude West and Lucent, and the cocktail reception sponsors, I hope you'll all join us this evening, Patrick Townsend, LawPay, and the Bar Association's Intellectual Property section. So please join me in thanking our sponsors. Before we get into the main portion of the program, I did want to remind and/or advise those folks who purchased the full-day program have as a gift for that book from our keynote speaker today, Judge Cordell, the book Homeowner, back at the table. If you would like, we do have extra copies, so if you did not purchase the full day and would like to get a book, they are available for a contribution of $20, and Judge Cordell will be staying for a little bit after her presentation to sign the books for us today, so we appreciate that. I'd like to introduce Erica Kletz. She is with our, excuse me, I'm so sorry. I need to read my notes. She is representing JAMS, our event sponsor. She will be making some introductions. Erica.
Thank you to the Contra Costa County Bar for hosting such a lovely event today. JAMS is happy to be the benefactor sponsor, and we appreciate our partnership with the entire Bar Association. I especially want to recognize Jody Heiner, Cynthia Wolf, and the rest of the CCCBA team. It's been wonderful working with you and partnering with you, also getting to know you all. We continue to be impressed by this event, and we're so happy to be here in person with all of you. I'm going to introduce Judge Pierce, then introduce Judge Cordell. Judge Mark Pierce joined JAMS after having spent 30 years in the private practice as a litigation attorney and 15 years as a judge for the Santa Clara County Court. He primarily handled civil litigation matters. He was appointed to the court in 2005, spent 10 years in the civil litigation department. Judge Pierce is new to the Contra Costa area. He moved from Santa Clara County recently, so he's very excited to be a part of this Bar Association now, and I'm welcoming him to the stage to introduce Judge Cordell.
Thank you so much, Erica. I appreciate the opportunity to introduce Judge Cordell. Judge Cordell has been a fixture in Santa Clara County for various functions for many years. When I look at her resume, I can't imagine how long she has been involved in a long time, she said. There's many things that she has done in Santa Clara County. Some of the most prominent things are the fact that she was appointed by Governor Jerry Brown to be the first African-American female judge in Northern California. She was a leader for the Bar Association in the many functions that she provided. She became a Superior Court judge in 1988 and subsequently went on to do a number of other things, including being the independent auditor for the City of San Jose Police Department, a very challenging position. She has never backed down from any challenges, and I can tell you that she is a very strong and very important woman. She also, and I got to know Judge Cordell a little bit with the recall of Judge Aaron Persky down in Santa Clara County, and it was something that was important to me. And Judge Cordell stood up for Judge Persky, who was unable to really stand up for himself because of judicial constraints. And while he was not re-elected to office, the fact that Judge Cordell was so strong and so powerful in the message that she gave to support the judiciary was greatly appreciated by everyone. She's now written a book, and I can tell you, I haven't read the book, but I can tell you that I have no doubt that the opinions and the issues that she raises in her book are undoubtedly provocative and important for all of us to read and consider. So if you have an opportunity, if you're not getting a copy of the book, I strongly recommend that you buy a copy, because I think that there are probably some very important and comments to be made on our judiciary and our judicial system. So, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Judge Cordell.
Thank you, Judge Pierce, thank you, Jody, and thank all of you for being here today. I greatly appreciate it. I actually had a wonderful drive up from where I live in South Bay, up here, no traffic issues at all. Great, thank you so much. In June 2019, I began writing her honor about my nearly 2 decades on the bench here in Santa Clara County. It's part primer about the world of state trial court judges, and it's part memoir about my nearly 20 years on the bench. So I call it a new genre. It's a primer memoir. The one and only silver lining for me about this pandemic was that it forced me to stay home and to write. Nothing was better to do. But there would have been no book but for my parents to save the letters that I wrote to them about my cases. So every Friday, during the last 8 years that I was on the bench, in the afternoon, I wrote letters to my parents. And I wrote about everything that happened that week. The cases I presided over, the names of the litigants and the lawyers, the decisions I made, and as importantly, how I felt when I made these decisions. And these weren't emails, folks, these were letters. Letters put in the mail, posted. And it saddens me that today, because of social media primarily, we've gotten away from letter writing. Everyone loves to get letters, except for the IRS. So these letters, after I retired from the bench, I went back east to visit my parents. And my mother, who was a very organized person, during my visit, pulls this box out from the middle of the closet, and she said, "What do you want me to do with these?" And my mother, next to me, had saved every one of those letters. So, surprised, I packed the letters up and I sent them back here to me in California. And it took me about 2 or 3 years before I could bring myself to read these letters. And when I did, I was surprised, one, by the volume of cases over which I presided, the variety of cases. And it was then that I got the idea that maybe some of these letters might be fodder for a book. So without those letters, I would never have been able to recall the stories that are in the book. And there are some This is just some of what I wrote about my parents in the first chapter called Dignified and Judgment. Lewis and Clara Hazard had worked hard to provide for us and to ensure that my two sisters and I went to college. Their mothers had been the help, domestic workers who toiled for next to nothing, serving wealthy white families who resided in Philadelphia's prestigious mainline suburbs. When my mother, a high school graduate, and my father, a graduate of North Carolina Agricultural and Technical College, married in 1943, they had neither an inheritance nor a nest egg to get them started. What they did inherit, though, was a terrific work ethic and a powerful drive to succeed. My parents would come to own a home and operate Spring Cleaners, a dry cleaning business that supported our family for 40 years. I started writing in June 2019 and completed the book in July 2020, and it was published a few months later in October. I was appointed to the bench in 1982 by then Governor Jerry Brown, making me the first African-American female judge in all of Northern California. I was sworn in by the Honorable Felton Henderson, who set forth, Felton was my friend, my mentor to this very day, and a guide during the time that I was on the bench. And after I was sworn in, I set out to mete out justice, as I noted in the first chapter of Dignified and Judgment. So, how did I get interested in going into judging? I talk about that in the first chapter. Let me just tell you briefly. There was a judge in Santa Clara County. His name was Mark Thomas. I didn't know him, but I got this phone call from him one day, and I was, at that time, assistant dean of the law school at Stanford. And Mark Thomas said to me, we have a judge pro tem program where lawyers with a certain number of years of experience can conduct a small claims case, just to give a sense of what it's like to be on the bench. And we don't have any women, we don't have people of color, and I put you on the list. I said, sure. And then I kind of forgot about it. A few months later, I get a phone call from the court saying, your name's come up, it's a random rotation, can you come and preside? So I went to court and presided over a case. And let me just tell you as a little teaser, because I talk about it in the book. It was a case, first of all, that got me on the road saying, I want to be a judge. The case involved two women, both of whom were black. So you can imagine the shock. I walk in, and it's just two black women and me. In Sunnyvale, California. And the issue was about hair. About black hair. So I'm going to leave that as a teaser. You can read what happened. But I also want to show you something. All right. Now, this is me for 20 years. All right? And I talk about hair in the book because hair is important if you're a black woman. So if you look at the very bottom in the middle, that's when I started in 1982, the long, straight, long locks there. And then if you go to the right, my hair gets a little shorter. That's when I got elected to the Superior Court in 1988. Then if you kind of look around, as you go circle up, I started to really be me. So you can see I had little dreadlocks going on, then I had a shortcut, I had a box, right, fade. And I show you all this because, one, yes, this is where I could be who I really was. And I wore my hair like this because I could. But I also wore my hair like this to bust stereotypes, to say to people in the courtroom, to the lawyers, the litigants, spectators, judges can look like this and do the work. And I can't tell you the looks I get out, coming out from the courtroom, all rise, and the judge with a box comes down. Like, get over it. This is it. All of my daughters now look and they're kind of like, what were you thinking? the first hair, just take it. So this was me in law school, so I even worked the fro. That was my third year in law school at Stanford. So a little secret about the book. The book has a book cover, and what is standard is in the inside flap. There is a credit for the design of the designer of the book cover, and there's a credit for the photographer who took the picture of me that's on the cover of the book. So when my editor at Macmillan said, what do you think? I said, it's great, but it's not acceptable. And she said, what's the deal? I said, I want another credit. What? I want a credit, I told her, for the woman who does my hair for Reveal, who's been doing my hair for 40 years. And she said, no. There's never credits for hair on books. It's fine, but never on books. And then, of course, I said to her, well, who made that rule? So that's just one. So I pushed back, and she said, okay. So this book is the only book in the world that has a credit for hair. They're really prescient at the time because in 2020, California enacted the Crown Act, and that says that no one can be discriminated against in the workplace based upon how they wear their hair. And that Crown Act was really motivated by the rampant discrimination against black women wearing their hair in natural styles in the workplace. So actually, back in the 1980s, 90s, I was ahead of my time. So let me just show you. That's Rabia. So I want you to see, that is the woman who's done my hair for almost 40 years. And it's a credit on the book. And I just want to show you, this is Benita, who was mentioned frequently in the book. Benita Jones, she was my bailiff. And this was Olga Olivas. So we had a brown and black lady courtroom for a long time. Trial judges